Hey everyone, welcome back to Leah Talks. If you're into economics, global politics, or just trying to understand why your washing machine suddenly costs more, you're in the right place. Today we're diving into one of the most controversial, misunderstood, and surprisingly powerful tools in the world economy: tariffs. Now I know the word alone might sound dry, but trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see just how much it shapes your wallet, your job market, and even your country's political strategy. From ancient empires to 2025 trade wars, tariffs have always played a bigger role than most people realize. So let's break it all down: how tariffs really work, what they actually do to economies, and whether they're a strategic weapon or just outdated protectionism in disguise. When textbook theory meets reality. Yeah, tariffs. That word that gets thrown around in presidential debates, global trade negotiations, and viral Twitter arguments, especially in 2025. Former President Donald Trump once famously said, "Tariffs are the most beautiful word in English language. More beautiful than love. It's music to my ears." Meanwhile, most economists will tell you the exact opposite, that tariffs make economies less efficient, distort prices, and lead to unnecessary losses. This debate isn't new. For centuries, economists, world leaders, and the general public have been locked in a tug-of-war over that issue. So, what's the real story? How can something that sounds so simple, basically a tax on imports, have such a complex ripple effect on the global economy? What role do tariffs play in international negotiations? What strategies actually work? And when it's all said and done, are tariffs good or bad for a country? That's what we're here to unpack. We'll zoom out and take a quick trip through history, looking at the rise and fall of global trade over the last 300 years. By the end of this, you'll have a clear understanding and probably a strong opinion of your own. Back in 2018, the Trump administration imposed tariffs ranging from 20% to 50% on imported washing machines. Why? Because international brands like Samsung, LG, and Haier were undercutting US companies like Whirlpool and GE, eating up their market share. So, what happened next? First, the US government brought in about $1 billion in tariff revenue over the next 3 years. But here's the catch: washing machine prices jumped by 34% over the next 5 years. By comparison, the rest of the home appliance market only rose by 23%. So washing machines got roughly 10% more expensive than the average appliance. And it didn't stop there. Not only did imported washing machine cost more, even American-made brands raised their prices. Dryers too. So who ended up footing the bill for all this? You guessed it: the American consumer. On the job side, there were some wins. Samsung and LG responded by opening or expanding factories in the US. Whirlpool ramped up its own domestic production. Altogether, it's estimated that these moves created about 2,000 new jobs. So yeah, just like in our bubble tea land example, producers and governments saw some gains, but consumers paid the price. At its core, tariffs are a trade-off between consumer purchasing power and domestic employment. By protecting a certain industry, you're essentially taking value away from consumers and handing it to producers and the state. So some groups win, others lose. And that leads to the million-dollar question: do tariffs make a country better off or worse off overall? That's the central question every government has to weigh when crafting trade policy. Alright, let's cut to the chase. Imposing tariffs might boost jobs in certain industries and pop up government revenue, but overall, consumers lose more than producers gain. The result is usually a net loss in total economic welfare. This is Econ 101, basic trade theory. The textbooks will tell you that free trade increases efficiency, while tariffs, subsidies, and quotas distort markets and reduce the overall economic pie. In other words, the economy grows best when good flows freely, without artificial barriers. That's the standard framework used in most economic models. Now, if we stick with the classic economic model, we'd come to a pretty clear conclusion: tariffs lead to a net loss, so governments should avoid them altogether, right? Well, not so fast. That view might work in a clean, idealized classroom model, but in the real world, Economics isn't always that black and white. In reality, tariffs can serve a range of strategic purposes that basic models just don't capture. Let's start with one of the most well-known arguments in favor of tariffs: protecting developing industries. This idea goes all the way back to Alexander Hamilton, America's first Treasury Secretary. In the late 18th century, Hamilton championed what's now called the infant industry protection theory. The idea that new industries often need temporary shielding from global competition so they have a chance to grow and mature. Think about it like this. If you're trying to launch a domestic electric vehicle industry, but you're competing head-to-head with giant, established global brands, how do you stand a chance? Tariffs give that industry a fighting shot. Sometimes sacrificing a bit of consumer surplus upfront can lead to long-term national gains, more jobs, stronger domestic supply chains, and homegrown innovation. And history backs this up. In the 19th century, both the US and Germany aggressively used tariffs to protect emerging industries: textiles, steel, automobiles. With a little friendly competition from the British, that protection helped both countries kickstart industrial booms that reshaped the global economy. So, who's running this playbook today? You might be surprised to learn that one of the most protectionist economies right now is India. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India's Make in India initiative has become a core national strategy. Despite pushback from the World Trade Organization (WTO), India has consistently raised tariffs to protect and promote its domestic manufacturers, especially in tech, pharmaceuticals, and consumer electronics. The result? Countries are filing WTO complaints left and right, but India keeps pushing forward. And it's not just India. Most developing nations today still rely on relatively high tariffs compared to developed economies. Why? Because for them, tariffs are more than a tax. They're a strategic tool for industrial development. But, and this is a big but, tariffs come with hidden costs that can ripple across the entire economy. It's not just that consumers pay higher prices. If the imported goods being taxed are actually inputs or raw materials, then you've got a supply chain problem on your hands. Here's where it gets interesting. Despite all the economic downsides, tariffs often get a lot of public support. Why? Because there is a common perception that imports is money leaving the country. It's like watching water drain out of a bathtub. People just feel uneasy about it. So when a government raises tariffs, it feels like a patriotic move. We're protecting our industries. We're keeping money at home. That idea resonates emotionally, especially during tough economic times. In fact, trade protectionism tends to spike during recessions or periods of sluggish growth. When the economy starts to slow down, calls to buy domestic and protect our jobs grow louder. We saw this pattern play out in one of the darkest chapters of economic history, the Great Depression. In the early 1930s, the US passed a Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, one of the most aggressive and widespread protectionist policies in American history. The goal was to protect domestic farmers and manufacturers. But instead, it triggered a global trade war. Other countries retaliated, world trade collapsed, and the depression deepened. Many economists now believe that protectionism actually slowed down the recovery. Now here's a twist you may not have considered. Sometimes tariffs aren't about economics at all. They're about politics. Let's talk about swing states. In US elections, a handful of key swing states can decide the presidency. These states often have powerful labor unions tied to specific industries, and those unions can influence government decisions in a big way. So what do we see? Trade policies, and tariffs in particular, often favor industries locating in swing states. Case in point, Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs. One of the biggest steel-producing states in the US is Pennsylvania, home to Pittsburgh, aka Steel City. And guess what? Pennsylvania is also one of the most important swing states in modern US elections. Coincidence? Probably not. This kind of strategic policymaking happens across party lines. When votes are on the line, tariffs become a political weapon, used to win support in just the right places. You should know that the Steelworkers Union in the US is massive. We're talking over 1.2 million members, and their headquarters are right in Pennsylvania. That union wields serious influence, especially in key swing states. Just a couple of years ago, Japan's Nippon Steel was gearing up to acquire US Steel. But you guessed it, the Steelworkers Union launched fierce protests and lobbied hard to stop the deal, mixing some national security concerns. And on January 3rd this year, President Biden signed an executive order blocking the acquisition. And hey, this isn't just a Trump-era thing. President Biden, Bush Jr., even Carter have all taken steel protectionist stances at different points. Now, we can't say the union is the sole reason behind these decisions, but there's no denying that swing states and their key industries hold massive sway over US trade policies and tariffs. Tariffs come with a bunch of hidden costs too. Things like limiting product diversity, restricting the flow of international ideas and innovation, reducing healthy competition. These are some of the very benefits that free trade tends to bring to the table, and tariffs can put a temper on them. Updated pros and cons, a complex picture. Now, take a look at our updated mental chart of tariffs pros and cons. It's starting to look pretty comprehensive. When you factor in all the real-world twists, political influence, retaliation, industry production, consumer impact, the general consensus among economists is indiscriminate. Broad tariffs usually lead to net losses and hurt the overall economy. The debate, economists versus politicians. When Trump talks about slamming tariffs on Canada and Mexico, or even all imports, a lot of economists throw up their hands in protest. Take Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winner in economics for his work on trade theory. He's been pretty clear. Large-scale, indiscriminate tariffs are going to hurt the US economy. His exact words? It doesn't make any sense. But, and this is a key, Krugman is speaking purely from an economic standpoint. Politicians, they often weigh other factors. Political pressure, national security, jobs, public opinion, that don't always fit neatly into economic theory. So who knows, sometimes trade decisions are about more than just dollars and cents. Next up, who really benefits? Enter game theory. We've just unpacked the pros and cons of tariffs in detail. But here's the kicker. Once you know who wins and who loses from tariffs, you can start to analyze the optimal strategies countries use when playing the tariff game. That takes us into the fascinating world of game theory. One of the most famous game theory explained is the prisoner's dilemma. Believe it or not, international trade often looks a lot like this classic dilemma. Don't worry, I'll break it down with a simple model, no complicated math required. Britain's free trade gamble, a lesson in tit for tat. So what did Britain do? They went all in on openness. In the 1840s, they repealed the Corn Law, which had protected British agriculture for decades. They slashed tariffs across the board and basically said to the world, "Look at us, we're leading by example, now it's your turn." But here's the problem, not everyone followed. Other countries were like, "Thanks for the low tariffs, Britain will keep ours though." So while Britain's markets became wide open for global imports, its exports kept running into tariffs walls overseas. That noble ideal of global cooperation, it kinda backfired. Britain hoped its generosity would create a ripple effect, sparking free trade around the world. Instead, it became more like a unilateral surrender, at least economically. They gave up the leverage of tariffs without getting reciprocal treatment in return. And when industrial rivals like Germany and the United States started catching up in the late 19th century, they did so while heavily protecting their own industries. So while Britain stuck to openness out of principle, others played the game with strategy, and it showed. This is a textbook cause of what happens when you play nice in a one-shot game, while others play for keeps. Britain had opened its market without using tit for tat, without saying, "Hey, if you don't lower your tariffs, we'll raise ours too." And in the end, it paid a price. Tit for tat in action, why it works. This is why tit for tat is such a powerful idea in game theory. You start cooperative, but you're not naive. You're sending a message. I want to work with you, but I won't let you walk all over me. So how does this look in real life? Think of WTO trade negotiations. Countries open their markets step by step, but always with an understanding. I open mine if you open yours. If one side cheats by raising tariffs, imposing quotas, or using shady subsidies, the other side is expected to hit back. This mutual understanding keeps things relatively balanced. It's not perfect, but it's infinitely better than a full-blown trade war. It's also why trade negotiations are usually so long, so technical, and so politically sensitive. They're not just about economics, they're about credibility, because in a repeated game, your reputation matters. And if a country breaks its promises too often, others stop cooperating altogether. Now, if you're thinking, wow, this sounds exhausting, you're not wrong. These kinds of trade disputes can stretch out for years, even decades, with both sides constantly gathering data, submitting complaints, appealing rulings, and negotiating settlements. It's like a never-ending chess game, except with billions of dollars and entire industries on the line. But that's the whole point of these international frameworks, to give countries a structured way to resolve conflicts without everything spiraling into full-blown trade war. It's messy, yes, but it's a far cry better than countries going rogue every time they feel slighted. The US-Canada softwood lumber dispute is the perfect example of that. It's been going on for over 40 years. Through multiple agreements, breakdowns, WTO rulings, NAFTA rulings, and now under the new USMCA, it's still not fully resolved. And yet, neither country has pulled the plug on trade with the other. Why? Because even with all the tension, the system works just well enough to keep everyone at the table. So where do these leave us? Let's pull back for a second and look at the big picture. We've talked about the basic mechanics of tariffs, the short-term economic impacts, their strategic use in politics and international negotiations, and how they fit into larger frameworks like game theory and international institutions. The takeaway? Tariffs are complicated. They can be useful tools, dangerous weapons, or strategic bargaining chips, depending on how and when they're used. And that's what makes trade policy so tricky. You're not just managing numbers on a spreadsheet, you're balancing short-term political gain versus long-term economic health, domestic industries versus consumer costs, national security versus international cooperation. It's like juggling fire. Done right, it's spectacular. Done wrong, someone's getting burned. Modern tariff strategy. It's all about leverage. Today, in 2025, tariffs are no longer just about protecting a local industry or collecting revenue. They're about leverage. They're a way to say, we want better terms and we're willing to play hardball to get them. That's what Trump understood. And whether you agree with his policies or not, the approach he took using tariffs as a negotiation tool has changed how many countries approach trade today. Biden, too, has continued down this path, albeit with a softer tone. He's placed more emphasis on allied coordination, climate consideration, and rebuilding supply chains, especially in critical sectors like semiconductors, clean energy, and pharmaceuticals. But don't be fooled, tariffs are still on the table. They're just being wielded a little more carefully. The world has changed, and so has the role of tariffs. In the 21st century, global trade isn't just about I make stuff, you buy it. It's about supply chains that stretch across continents, about digital trade, data flows, intellectual property, national security, and yes, climate policy. Tariffs now intersect with all these issues. A tariff on Chinese solar panels might seem like just a trade move, but it's also a signal about energy independence, technological leadership, and geopolitical competition. So when someone asks, are tariffs good or bad? The only honest answer is, it depends. It depends on the goal, the timing, the target, and most of all, the strategy behind it. Coming up next, the big picture in context. Now that we've unpacked the theory, the strategy, and the real-world examples, it's time for the final part of our journey, the historical sweep. We're going to zoom out and look at 300 years of global trade, from the days of mercantilism and colonial monopolies to the rise of free trade, the world wars, the creation of the Bretton Woods system, and the more recent tension around deglobalization and economic nationalism. How did we get from tea taxes and imperial navies to NAFTA, Brexit, and trade wars over semiconductors? And what does it all mean for the future of global trade? Stick with me because this is where everything comes together. This shift toward economic nationalism isn't just about tariffs anymore. It's about reshoring, local supply chains, strategic independence, and self-sufficiency, particularly in critical sectors like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, energy, and defense. We've entered what many economists now call the third era of trade policy, strategic globalization. Countries still want to trade, yes, but they also want to control the risks. No one wants to be caught flat-footed again, like when supply chains broke down during COVID, or when geopolitical tensions threatened critical imports like rare earth minerals or microchips. So rather than focusing purely on cost efficiency and open markets, governments are now thinking more like chess players. What if my supplier becomes my adversary? What if I lose access to key resources during a crisis? That's why you see the US passing laws like the Chips and Science Act, pushing for domestic semiconductor manufacturing. It's why the EU launched its European Green Deal industrial plan, and why countries like Japan, South Korea, and India are all investing heavily in domestic production capacity. Even free trade champions are starting to ask, what do we really mean by free? Because if free trade comes with the cost of strategic vulnerability, job loss, or social unrest, then maybe it's not so free after all. So where are we now? After 300 years, the global trade story is anything but linear. It moves in waves, and we've seen at least three. First wave, 19th century to 1914, driven by Britain and steam power trade. This era brought down tariffs, but also reflected deep colonial inequality. Second wave, post-World War II to 2008, led by the US and post-war institutions like GATT and the WTO. This era saw the rise of multilateralism and unprecedented trade liberalization. Global GDP and living standards soared. Third wave, 2010s to present. We're now in a strategic, politically charged era. Trade is still critical, but national security, resilience, and domestic control are back on the front burner. In many ways, we are watching globalization mature. It's no longer just about maximizing profits. It's about managing complexity, reducing dependency, and protecting national interest while still collaborating with the world. Looking back to look ahead. Let's take a second to tie everything together. Tariffs started out as a simple way to collect government revenue and protect new industries. Over time, they became part of broader strategic playbooks, tied to politics, power, negotiation, and economic philosophy. We saw that indiscriminate tariffs often backfire. But strategically deployed tariffs, especially when coordinated or temporary, can serve a purpose. And we followed the rise and fall, and rise again, of trade liberalization over 300 years, understanding that each shift reflects deeper social, political, and economic priorities of the time. The bottom line. Trade isn't just about economics, it's about values, priorities, the leverage. Tariffs in particular aren't inherently good or bad. They're just a tool, like any other tool. They can be used wisely or recklessly. So the next time you hear a politician say, we're going to raise tariffs to protect our workers, or tariffs are killing our economy, ask a deeper question. Who benefits? Who loses? What's the long-term strategy? No trade policy exists in a vacuum. Every decision occurs across time, borders, and industries. When facing trade sanctions, the sanctioned country has to respond. You can't sit back and hope for fairness. You have to retaliate. That's the whole logic behind tit for tat. Not because revenge is sweet, but because without consequences, cooperation falls apart. The truth is, this protective sentiment is contagious. Once one country closes its doors, others start reaching for the log. It spreads, and once it takes hold, it's very hard to reverse in the short term. In recent years, we've watched as institutions like the WTO, which were once the cornerstones of the global trading system, have started to lose their grip. The rules aren't being enforced the way they used to. Appeals go unanswered, disputes drag on, and for the first time in decades, there's real doubt about whether the old system still works. We may be entering a long era of deglobalization, a time when supply chains shorten, countries look inward, and trade becomes more about leverage than partnership. But that doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom. History runs in cycles. There have been trade winters before, and they've been followed by golden ages. So whether you're a policymaker or a business leader, a student of economics, or just someone trying to make sense of a changing world, keep this in mind. Trade isn't just about goods, it's about strategy, security, trust, and power. How we handle trade shapes everything, from what's on our store shelves to who wins the next global tech race. That's the story of tariffs and the bigger story of global trade. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. It's been a ride, spanning centuries, industries, countries, and ideas. I hope it gave you a fresh way to see how economics, politics, and global power all collide in the world of trade. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!